I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with,
Adam Dietz, welcome back.
and we are here with our guest, Tigrilla Gardenia. And before the break, Tigrilla, we were talking about uh, sitting quietly in the forest and allowing your awareness to expand into the forest and noticing the patterns inside and outside. You are currently talking to us from Italy and from
Yes,
a community that's called Damanhur. Is that correct?
correct.
Then tell us a little bit. Tell us about Damanhur. Why are you
So,
there?
Damanhur is kind of, I call it a cross between Hogwarts and Oz. That's kind of what it feels like. That's what it is. So, it's one of the largest spiritual communities in the world. We're an esoteric community, so we're an initiatic culture who has like very deep teachings of spiritual physics. But the thing about us is that for us, what we call meditate action is really like meditation done with your hands, the whole idea of building. So we've
Oh,
built what is considered, I don't know, some people call it the eighth wonder of the world, others will call it the first wonder of the new world, and they're the underground temples of humankind. And
hmm.
so we're really a space of a laboratory for humanity of what it looks like when you live your spirituality, when you live in mission. We have missions that we carry out on a regular basis for humanity. When it is that you are looking at the world through an esoteric lens, through a mystical lens, as you were
Yep,
talking about,
yep.
like that contemplation, and what happens when you get together and you build based on that. So it's really an amazing place filled with art because for us it is through art that we divinitize matter. It is the way that we connect into the sacred. So sacred spaces, new temples, all of them built completely by us, by hand, and beautifully decorated with incredible artwork that tells the stories of humanity because we believe that in that construction, whether we're talking about going deep into the underground temples of humankind, where I go deep into myself and
Hmm.
my own excavation of who I am, to then the Sacred Woods Temple, which is the temple where we connect with all the living beings of the world. So, everything we were talking about before about our connection to nature as beings of nature, or whether we're talking about our open temple, a celebration of all the different ways that people express themselves, the diversity of the world. All of this allows us to really create a culture around it and what we call a new popolo, a new people that are connected through shared ideals and through action in those ideals.
But you're also, as a community, attending to the teachings of the plant masters.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the beautiful part about Damanhur is that, our core is spiritual physics, right? The idea of the
Right,
cosmology of the
right.
universe, the understanding of the big game of life that we're all playing. We have a chunk of the mission, right? Our part of what we consider to be Vaine, which is the reawakening, the spiritual reawakening of the divine spark of every human being. We have our piece, right? There's tons of cultures out there, like the ones that you have all studied, that all have a little bit of a piece of that mission, right? We're carrying it out in different ways. And ours, one of the big pieces is about the reunification of what we call the mother worlds, the
Right.
plant world, the human animal world, and the world of nature spirits. And how do we bring these three worlds back into unity so that we are operating from one whole rather than these separated pieces in it? So for that, we have, like I said, a Sacred Woods Temple, which is our experimental playground where we explore these different connections. And we have many other spaces. And so where we can then work very closely with plant beings, with our co-creators, with nature spirits, and understanding with spirals, with many other kinds of beings as well, in order to bring this piece of the mission for us.
So how is that similar to the biodynamicism of Rudolf Steiner?
Hmm. It's interesting because we have a vineyard in Tuscany because we're in the north, we're in
Oh,
the
cool.
Piemonte region. But
Okay.
in Tuscany, for example, we do have a vineyard that is a biodynamic vineyard. And so for us, it's about exploring these different, because Steiner definitely had many different aspects of the relationship with nature, with
Mhm.
with even the schooling and such that matches many of the different teachings that we have. And so for us, what we do is we take that and we experiment with it within a larger cosmology. We look at it and we unite it into the day-to-day life and then bring it in and look at, okay, how does this enhance other aspects of life? So we definitely have been working on we've had a lot of scholars of Steiner who've come to Damanhur to visit, to explore, especially his work with nature spirits, his work, like I said, in
Oh,
farming, his work in schooling. And then we take that and we kind of plug it into a bigger experimentation to see, okay, what's working, what's not working. I mean, we say that in Damanhur, the only dogma is change. Like we're just constantly exploring and changing because that's
yeah,
how life is. It's always evolving and doing different things. So Steiner was definitely a friend of Damanhur, you can say, and
right.
someone whose teachings we definitely take in and explore quite deeply.
So in our daily life, currently in 2026, uh, and I'm from Minnesota, so you probably heard some of the stuff that's been going on there
Oh yeah.
and in our country in the United States. Um, I can just imagine what the Europeans must be thinking. Uh, what would you recommend to our listeners to do as a daily practice about how to reconnect with the natural world?
This is such an important piece right now because for so many reasons. I mean, we live in a perpetual state of fear, even beyond what's happening. But like, and I think one of the things that propels certain types of people to these types of actions, unfortunately, is the perpetual fear we live in. And I
Mm.
am very much convinced that that fear at a low, low, deep level comes from our disconnection with nature. It's the
Oh,
original
yeah,
trauma.
yeah.
It is the original trauma when we were ripped out or when we ripped ourselves out to a certain extent from the natural world. We no longer have a safe space. We
I
no
say, I'm
longer have
not
a
that.
home.
Right, right.
Exactly. I'm not that. And so you're not anything. And it comes and that when we move to like even myself, I change the way I speak from a kingdom, which is dominion, right? Where
Right,
I'm
right.
dominating something to
Yep.
a kin home, the home of
Ooh,
kinship,
that's nice.
right? Where we really are about connecting. So a simple, 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 simple practice that anybody can do is remember that we live in a shared breath, right? Breath is the foundation of everything that we are. I
Yes.
take it that this is an important factor for you all too.
Oh, this is
Yeah,
wonderful.
breathing. Very
Breathing is
important.
so very important. And so what happens is it is plants that create that oxygen for us, right? They oxygenate our world, but plants also take in our carbon dioxide. It is a shared breath. It is a reciprocal relationship. It is the fundamental relationship that we all experience, mostly unconscious, but for those who are able to take it to a conscious level. So just taking a few minutes every day to sit anywhere because pretty much, but if you can be near a plant, whether that's
Hmm.
a house plant that lives with you and shares your home, or even sitting by grass, which I absolutely love. And there's so many other earthing and grounding principles that you get, or by a nearby tree in your front yard or in a park, just sit and breathe. And imagine that shared breath. Like imagine that as you take in that breath, that inhale, you're bringing in all of that oxygen, all of the terpenes, the chemicals, the volatile organic compounds that these plants are producing that literally make us feel good, that create cancer killing cells, that activate our immune systems. And then as you breathe out, imagine that all of that crap that you're living in, I mean, seriously, what is
Hmm.
fertilizer made out of? It's
Right.
crap, like
Yep, yep.
literally. So imagine that as you breathe out your crap, the plants take that in and use that to nourish themselves and to filter out into it. And just feeling that automatically, like I said, connects you. And I guarantee that if you do this every single day, your life will start to change because you now feel plugged into something bigger without having to study. It's that mystical piece, right? It's
Hmm.
the all I do is allow my breath to move me and then see where it takes me.
That's wonderful. Very, very beautiful and so simple, right?
Mhm.
As a background in meditation, right? one of the first things we all do as meditators is to focus on the breathing. Because it's always
Exactly.
with you. You can always yoke yourself back to that. And to connect it with the plant world, the purification that happens, the relationship that happens is really profound. I appreciate you for that. I also wanted to maybe take a bigger step and look at, because I remember from the documentary Planet Earth with David Attenborough, that the planet breathes, the seasons
Hmm.
breathe.
Hmm.
And this relates very closely to Taoist philosophy. And of course, I mentioned meditating Buddhist philosophy. Taoist philosophy says the reverse and return is the movement of the way. So breath goes in, breath comes in, breath goes out. Tides go in, tides go out. Seasons go up, seasons come back down to winter. So I just wanted to make a note of that and maybe get your take on it, but especially the sense of that the planet breathes. When the deciduous trees lose their leaves, it's like what would that be? Inhale? I don't know. And then when they come back, it's like exhale. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up this piece because I think that that's the next step, right? When you start with the breathing and then you connect back in, you start to realize a few things that, again, just naturally come to you. One of them is the fact that we all have seasonal flows, right? We
Hmm.
all have our uptime and our downtime, and that happens within a day,
Yeah,
it happens within a month, it happens within a year.
good.
And so we are not meant to be on all the
Mm,
time. This
mm.
whole hustle culture is crap. It hurts us. It is terrible
As you
because it's
found out.
not our natural way, right? I
Yep.
naturally have a cycle throughout the day. There's moments when I'm more awake, there's moments when I'm more sleepy, there's moments when I'm more open to like conversation and relationships. There's moments when instead I'm more like heads down and doing. That is a natural piece of the cycle. And when I breathe and I start to work with natural beings, specifically plants, I start to see these cycles in action and I start to recognize and allow myself to recognize them within myself. For example, I'm a napper, man. I need my nap during the day. There is
Mhm.
a point in the day where my mind no longer works and trying to push through it is not going to work. If I allow myself to nap, then for example, like I did today, my afternoon was so productive in certain things because that's what my normal cycle is.
Well,
And then you
well,
start to expand that. You start to feel their cycle throughout the year. You start to, the months, all of these different pieces. You start to feel the relationship with other beings, the lunar months, the what's happening in the astrology. And all of a sudden now there's a flow and a relationship that you start to build. And
Mm,
again,
mm,
this brings the sense of safety because
mm.
now all of a sudden
Good
I
point,
am no
Cynthia.
longer fighting my nature and thinking discipline and something is wrong with me. Instead, I'm like, oh, this is just the time of day when I normally get sleepy. And that's totally natural and it's comfortable. And I feel safe in
Mm,
giving myself permission to
mm,
do things.
mm,
So I think that that piece, as you were just saying, is like you start with the breath because it is the basics, and you start with the breath with other beings. And then you naturally, the next time you take the breath, you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm not taking the breath of this one plant, but of all of these plants. And then, oh, my feet are on the ground. And all of a sudden, I can feel that electromagnetic energy, which is what comes from that grounding. Like you said, you feel now the pulse of the earth,
mm,
which is an electrical pulse that triggers my own neurons and my own electrical pulses inside of me.
mm,
And so it just keeps expanding without having to theorize about it or mentalize about it or even just like plan for it. It becomes this thing that creates a field of understanding
mm.
and of safety that we move through. And I think this is really just fundamentally a piece that we lost in this disconnection.
I'm
you
sure
know,
our listeners can feel the need for that and the need for that maybe within themselves or with other people and how wouldn't we all like to feel safe? Wouldn't we all like to feel connected?
all right. Well, we're coming up on another break. I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with,
Adam Dietz, thanks for joining the conversation.
and our guest is Tigrilla Gardenia. And how can people contact you, Tigrilla?
Super easy. You can contact me at Tigrilla Gardenia on just about every platform you can imagine, or tigriagardenia.com. That's Tigrilla, and then gardenia, the beautiful flower, Gardenia.
Great. All right, we're going to take a short break and be right back, so stay tuned. I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with
Adam Dietz, welcome back.
And we are talking with our guest who is in Italy right now, Tigrilla Gardenia, who is an ambassador and a plant advocate. And before the break, Tigrilla, you were talking about a daily practice of just breathing. I mean, it's so simple. But I also wanted to reflect. I'm currently in an MBA program, all about business. And my goodness, what a different experience this is in business is all about counting stuff. And there isn't a lot that I'm finding so far that is about humanity in the natural world. And I was listening to you speak about the natural cycles that you are now attending to that are not allowed for, like when you were working for Microsoft, for example, or, they're not allowed for in the corporate culture because it's all this thinking and it's disconnected from this envelope that we happen to live in, this human body. So the thing that I'm curious about is, what was your experience when you finally began to tune into that and be released from your corporate bondage?
This is such a great question. So I made a pact with myself when I left the corporate world.
Okay.
I made a pact that said I was never going to wake up with an alarm clock again.
Oh no.
That was my pact
How
for
long were you
myself.
there in the corporate world,
And
by the way?
I spent 10 years in high tech back
Oh
then, and then I
man.
left. And then I started producing my own events, and I had an event
Mhm.
production company and a circus, and I co-owned a circus. And then eventually I left on tour with Cirque du Soleil, which, to be honest, Microsoft was a lot better than Cirque du Soleil, but that's another story altogether.
Sure.
There was a lot of other good things that came out of this. And then I've been pretty much working for myself, like for since then. So it's
Yep.
been a very long time. And I kept this pact for myself for a very, very long time. Right now, I do use an alarm clock, but there's reasons for it. And one of the things that I wanted to understand was when I started working with the natural world, one of the things I really wanted to understand was my own cycles. I spent
Oh,
the
right.
better part of a year where I said to myself, I have an innate trust that I am let's just say, ambitious person, like in the sense that I have a desire for mission and purpose and for service. So I knew that I feel like I'm lazy because I feel like I have a lot of downtime, but we'll get to that in a second. But I knew that in the end, my desire to do things was always very strong. So I said to myself, you know what, I don't know what my natural cycle is. I mean, I've been waking up at a certain time since
Yeah.
birth, pretty much. Like, you have to wake up with an alarm clock, you have to go to
You
school, you have to go
must.
to work, you have to go to, all these different things. You must, you must, you must. And I don't know when I'm productive. And so I did this experiment and I started to record. And I said, if I was to just give myself permission to work whenever I felt called to work and to rest whenever I felt called to rest, what would happen? And it was amazing. I discovered my natural rhythm, for example, is I actually naturally get up decently early in the sense that by 8 o'clock in the morning I am up and functional, like, and then I that period of time, the morning time, is like when I am peak strategy. Like, I can do things that are strategic in nature, things that require thought process to do all that. And then I have a very late lunch. Like, in my ideal world, I don't eat until, and it was great because I was living in Spain at the time, like 2, 3 o'clock in the
Hmm.
afternoon.
Hmm.
And after that, I am useless. I am like veg on the couch, watch a movie, like sleep, take a nap. Siesta and I, like I said, get along very well. And then when I'm done with that, I become productive again, but in a more mystical, like, that's when I'm a coach most, and so that's when I love my clients. I love to do client calls or to teach workshops at that time because it's much more relational and that time.
Right.
And then I have another period of like downtime. And then if I am awake past 10 o'clock, all of a sudden I'm up until 3 o'clock in the morning and I am super creative. Like that's when
Wow.
I create the most innovative stuff that is like coming from outer space and who knows what the heck is inspired. So when I realized all of this and then decided to lean into it, you would be amazed. I get so much more done. I consider myself lazy because I have a lot of downtime. Like I spend a lot of time staring out at Gary the Silver Fir or sitting on my balcony or sitting on my couch looking at art and just sitting there. And yet, people are constantly telling me, I don't know how you produce so much. And
Right.
I was like, I produce so much because I only work when I'm inspired.
Right.
Only work when I'm inspired. And when I'm inspired, I am like a machine. I mean, I can get so much done, but I don't force myself. Like, I don't do client calls in the morning unless I have to. I'll do meetings in person, but I won't do like other kinds of stuff unless, there's a rare exception because that's just not when my body works.
Right.
And that has been liberating. And then going back to the deciduous trees that you were talking about, deciduous trees are dropping their leaves because they're pulling in all their resources. So in the fall,
Oh,
I do a what is important to me? What is the analysis? Like what do I keep? What am I going to get rid of? Like so that by the winter time, I am way slower. My world is now built on my natural cycles, like what works for me. And again, I am super productive in much less time. We call it here the augmenting of complexity. I am way more complex than I ever
hmm
was.
hmm
And so it's great. It's so much, it's liberating because then when I do feel tired, I just go and take a nap. Like I do not have any qualms about it anymore.
hmm
And I only wake up early because it is in the wee hours of the morning that I like to exercise. I like to exercise when it's dark outside.
hmm
Don't ask me why. It's just the way my body is built. If I wait until after 8 a.m., I will never exercise. Somewhere between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m., that's when I get the most. That's just how my mind works. And that's how my body works. And I now honor that. And I think that's the biggest difference. There are some places that I've worked on in the startup world that allowed for that. And I think that that's why the
Oh, yeah.
innovation happens in the startup world.
Yeah.
That idea of just the straight up 9 to 5 doesn't work. The idea that somebody, and many startups had, I mean, at least in the days that I used to work in startups, we had, pool tables and ping pong. I mean, even Microsoft had them and games and stuff. Why? Because we need downtime. I can't, I'm
Yeah.
not a machine. And I think that if you looked at, for example, biomimicry for social innovation, and you introduce some of those principles into MBA programs, for example, and this is
Mm.
the reason why biomimicry like is in coming into certain kinds of business structures, especially
hmm
for social innovation, which is a little bit more difficult because you have to look for other kinds of patterns. But
Right.
when you do that, oh man, there's just it's so much more enjoyable. It's so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, I really got a sense of joy. So,
Yeah,
and
I
Adam,
just
you're a Confucian specialist, and what does Confucius have to say about this, or what were you going to mention?
well, yeah, I want to just point out real quick that, when you're talking about the 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. window, that's where let's take it from a Taoist bent. That's
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
the world is fresh. It's new
Mhm.
energy. And I just want to make the connection that that's the time of the year that we're in right now. Lunar New Year occurs at this time for a reason because, the winter is over. We're past midwinter. We've had a month past midwinter where we kind of, collect our thoughts, gather our energy, and now brand new, fresh energy is going to be entering the world. So I just wanted to make that connection with Chinese cosmology. Confucius is very interesting. There are in this regard, there are some really profound moments in Confucianism where it talks about ecology
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and human relating to ecology, like use a big net when you're fishing. No, use a net that allows I'm getting it wrong. I'll have to,
Well,
at the top of my head, I'm getting it wrong. But I want, more importantly, though, and this is where I want to get your take on it, Tigrilla, is Confucius has, I had this experience when I was working with state parks. I thought, oh man, spirituality has to be in a mountaintop somewhere, and I have to listen to the birds and the streams and get away from this dirty world. And then I got smacked right in the face with Confucius, who said, we're not birds, we're human beings. And I think you hit on it a little earlier, where human beings have a role to play. And our
Mhm.
role to play is in humanity, in our relationships, and
yeah.
that only we can fulfill that role. The entire time and space of cosmos has come into this human being, and my entire destiny and karma has put me in these relationships in this time and space, and only I can fulfill what we call in Confucianism heaven's destiny in this
Yeah.
time and space. Could you say something from your perspective on how humanity plays its role? You mentioned it a little earlier, but could you go back into it in this context?
Yeah, this is a great conversation because so Damanhurians believe in reincarnation, and we also work very close with the soul structure. And as you said, when you incarnate, right, we incarnate with a set of personalities into a general structure. We have a piece of ourselves that is always kind of, we call it the element in nature, you call it the deep pattern. It's something you see often when you're talking about social innovation. What is the deep pattern? And we all have this like element and deep pattern that we express at everything from life to life to life. But your personalities are different based on what is necessary for you to accomplish in this life,
Mm.
right? So it's that time and space that is very different. And how do we get into connection with this? It is, like you said, understanding our role. Remember, I said Damanhur is a culture where we look at, instead of meditation, it's medit action, because it is the actions that we
Mhm.
take. It is the role that I fill as part of what we call the super individual, right? We are a collective we. For us Damanhurians, we say you need to have a minimum of 5 people in order to create a person. So it takes 5 people to create a person because each one of us has different roles that we play. We play mirrors to one another to help us in our evolution. And even in nature, we say that species evolve faster together. And it's the same thing for us. We are part of nature, so we evolve faster together. And so when you're working with others, you can create what's called a super individual, which is definitely the sum of, the not just the sum of their parts, right? It's that plus that gets created from the union. So in reality, we always live inside these super rich relational fields, and it is those relational fields, whether we're talking about our connection to mycelium, whether we're talking about connection to your brother, your sister, to your friend, or even to your enemy, because as we know from nature, right, we have parasites and we have competition and we have all these other beings that, in the right dosage, in the right duration, can be really powerful
Yeah.
entities that help us move into new levels. And
Mm.
so all of these different pieces kind of connect together in order for us to create what needs to be created. And you said another element that I think is so, so important, and which is there was a study done many, many years ago by Stephen Kellert, who is the person who co-founded or co-coined the word biophilia with E.O. Wilson. And they did
Oh,
a
sure.
study called The Nature of Americans. And it was a study done that compared adult Americans and children in their relationships to nature. And what they found was super fascinating, because they said one of the problems for humans, talking about that disconnection, is that we see nature as out there. I
Right.
need to
Right.
go hiking. I need to go to the mountaintop. We believe that that mystical experience
Right.
comes from going out there and getting far away from humans. But children find it in the most awe-inspiring places right next to them. They
Yep.
walk out of the house and they see like a little plant that's growing or moss growing in the sidewalk crack, and they're like,
Yeah.
wait,
It's a whole
look
world.
at that.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Ants is
ants
like
that
a
are walking
miracle. Yeah, I was gonna
across.
say
Yeah,
ant.
it's like the miracle of everything. And all of a sudden, those endorphins hit, all of that awe and wonder that is part of our connection to nature gets triggered. Remember, I was saying earlier, one of the things I discovered is I sit here sometimes like for an hour, and I just, either I have a beautiful wall, you can't see it, but my house is covered in art. And I love art because it triggers that connection, that creativity, that connection to the energy people put into it, that nature connection. So I'm always like just sitting there staring, and that is my mystical. I don't need. I mean, I go to the mountains a lot. I go hiking. I live in this beautiful valley filled with
Mm.
gorgeous mountains, and I love doing that. But I also love just sitting at home with, you know, Noel the Christmas cactus. Or today I was in a weird mood and I went to to move something by my window, and Zan, who is one of the galactic aloe siblings that lives in my house, is putting out a beautiful flower. And I was
Oh,
so awestruck that my whole afternoon was fantastic. I just finished my nap and I was like, a little groggy still. And all of a sudden I saw this flower. I even wrote a Instagram story about it because it's like, oh my goodness, Zan, hope. Thank you.
yeah.
And all of a sudden I feel amazing. My mystical experience doesn't require me to go out there.
Yep.
I am
Yep.
totally captivated by all the natural, whether that's holding on to the wood of my table or the cotton fibers of my
Mm.
clothes, or Zan putting out a flower, or Gary the Silver Fir standing huge right outside my window.
Right.
It's all nature, and it all has the opportunity to trigger that beauty that you see in Kabbalah when we talk about like Tiferet, that awe, that wonder that is what is so healthy for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to take a short break. I'm sorry to say I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with.
Adam Dietz, who just remembered the net story, says stay tuned.
Okay, and stay tuned. And we're with our guest, Tigrilla Gardenia. And how can people contact you, Tigrilla?
And I can be found on all the platforms at just at Tigrilla Gardenia or at tigrillagardenia.com.
And it's Tigrilla, and then Gardenia. Great. We'll take a short break and be right back. So stay tuned. I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with.
Adam Dietz, welcome back to the conversation.
And our guest today is Tigrilla Gardenia. And you had something that came to mind just before the break, Adam?
Yeah, I was mentioning in Confucianism there is a sense of ecology. First of all, you earlier, Tigria, you were talking about five people, and it's very interesting because in
Yes.
Confucius they have five
Five
relationships.
relationships.
There
Yeah,
Yep.
you go.
yeah. So we can get into that a different time. We don't need to get into details, but I also what coming up is you're talking about your enemy can actually help you grow.
Mhm.
Anthony and I went through a huge upheaval because it felt very Project 2025, where our philosophy department was just obliterated out of the blue at Sonoma State for seemingly no reason. It was a net earner for the university, and they used budget concerns to just blow us up and five other departments and the entire athletic department. So anyway, the point is that felt like Project 2025 kind of enemy energy, and I just want to say like we've met so many amazing people. We're doing this podcast
Right.
because of that. So it's like
Yep.
this trickster enemy thing that happens that helps you grow. I want to point out. Um, and the last thing was I just remembered the story from Confucianism where there's a sense of ecology. I think people think of Confucian often as very patriarchal, hierarchical, do this, do that. And it's meant to be a relationship back and forth. A father should be a father, a son should be a son. It's both. A father should be very caring and loving. Anyway, point being, they also have a sense of human responsibility, including with the natural world, including with ecology. So he tells a story of how a fisherman should use a net with big holes, right? So that all the small fish can go out and you only catch the big fish so the small fish can keep living and multiplying and thriving. And the old fish, they're probably closer to death anyway. So we working to kind of cull them. Same thing when you do hunting for the ruler, same thing. Allow the smaller creatures to go away and just only hunt the bigger creatures. So I just remembered that story and wanted to point that out since it was a loose thread. I want to ask you the one question. Much earlier in the conversation, we were talking about some of the work that you do with people
Mhm.
to help them connect. And to me, it felt like there's a sense that you have to kind of deconstruct your own identity. You have to kind of empty out your preconceptions of yourself. Is that true?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, one of So I work a lot with people with conditioning, with, again,
Okay.
whether you're multi-passionate, neurodivergent, helping you really understand. I always say that you want to understand within your own bubble how your mind works so that you can feel super comfortable and confident about that. And then we can work on how to translate that out to an external need, for example, right? I might work in one way, and then I might need to give my boss a deliverable that works in a certain way. And so
Mhm.
the packaging it shouldn't be confused with how I process and how I deal with it and how I get my work done. So a lot of my work is about deconstructing and I would say even more than anything, being honest with yourself, giving yourself permission to be able to see who you truly are
Mm.
and without any kind of judgment. So my kind of, you might say, superpower is to be able to create a sacred space. And I'm a bridge. I help people kind of get from where they are to where they want to be. So by creating a super, super safe space where you could literally look at anything without feeling like there's something wrong, because I fundamentally believe that your ecosystem is natural, right? The way your mind works. For example, many people try to have one system where they're disciplined for, I don't know, a to-do list or a task list. But the truth of the matter is that we translate things differently. Like creative tasks, I might need to write down. Technical tasks, I might have in a calendaring app. Tasks that instead feel more relational might be something that I put post-it notes around my house, or my friends have to call me. Like when I start to understand how my own nature works, I can then create those relational fields that I was talking about, right? I basically cultivate your inner ecology. And to
Mm.
cultivate your inner ecology, you've got to remember that when I go into, I don't know, a temperate forest, or when I go into, any kind of a savanna or any other thing, there are a series of ways that all of these plants and animals work together, but there's also a lot of innovation that's constantly happening, right? There's evolution is happening right before your eyes. And so a plant that might be kind of taken out, like most of the plants in our homes were actually originally tropical plants. Many plants that live inside of homes with people, they've had to adapt to cold weather, they've had to adapt to a whole series of things. But that doesn't mean that they're not fundamentally that same plant. I mean, there's two aloe plants sitting here, those galactic twins that I was talking about, and they are fundamentally aloes, right? So they're not going to start, doing something completely different. And at the same time, they do adapt to be able to live in a place where it's cold outside, it gets cold here at night, and all these different pieces. So my work really is about helping you see all of these little quirks, not as things. I don't believe you should eliminate anything. One of the things the plants taught me very early on was all of your skills are useful as long as you learn how to use them in their constructive powers and in their
Mm.
destructive powers. A chainsaw is something that can be scary and dangerous and terrible. It can also be extremely useful and something that is necessary in certain situations. There's nothing wrong with the chainsaw. It's all in how you use it. There's nothing wrong with the way that you do things or your skills or all of those negative traits that people say you might have. It's all in how you use them.
Yeah. We're coming up to the end of the interview here, and I want to touch on something that we talked about before we began. I'm a piano technician, and um, you have I've done something I really want to listen to more of, and it's created music with plant musicians. Talk to us a little bit about that, and would you play one of the pieces we talked about, please?
Absolutely. So this is one of my big passions because it was what opened the door for my relationship with plants. So I'm a musician also by nature. I have a degree in music engineering, and so
Ah,
music and engineering, that right brain, left brain thing is my thing. And the first time I ever heard plant music, which is basically kind of the similar to the fact that we all have instruments like guitars and pianos and such, there's this instrument called the Music of the Plants device, which is a musical instrument specifically for plants. And the first time I ever heard a plant play, all of a sudden it was like a plant reawakening. I was looking at the plant, listening to the music, and I was like, are you talking to me? Like, what is going on here? All of a sudden, it was like an understanding that not only is a plant alive in a biological sense, but aware and conscious
Yeah.
and able to make decisions. And then later that got backed by science. And, I got a master's degree in vegetal future, which is plants, social innovation and design. So it's like, I just took it to the next level. But plant music really is a way it's an interface, because we think of language as we think of music as a language, but it's actually the opposite. It is language that is a musicality. Music
Yes.
comes first. It
Yeah.
is the foundation of everything, rhythm and tone, as you know, and all the different powers that come from that vibration, how it affects our body, how we think, the emotionality that comes through the notes of music, all these different aspects. So when a plant is able to, create music, it's almost like all the language barriers break down, because I bypass language and I go straight to the source.
Absolutely. Can
Could
we
you
hear
And
that?
say
so
could you say a little tiny bit more about the interface first before to explain to us?
of course. So the music of the plants is actually very simple. It's a biofeedback device.
Mm.
So what we did was we created using the electrical impulses. So similar to the way that we have electrical impulses going through, plants have something called action potentials that are electrical signals that are used.
Wow.
Plants have very sophisticated senses beyond our five. Like they have the same five, but also about 15 others. And one of them is connected to their electrical responses. So it's
Wow.
much more sophisticated. And so we discovered that if you created two probes, one that goes into the soil and one that goes to the leaf, you could measure these electrical impulses, the impedance between the two, and then we could then map those onto notes of music. Now, we thought we were going to be listening to the plants, like kind of a one-way conversation. But what ended up happening over the years, we started this project in the late 1970s here in Damanhur and has been developing ever since, was that we realized that over time, the plants would change their music based on who was around and what was happening.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we started to realize, oh my goodness, the plant is actually hearing. This is before plant neurobiology starts as a science in around 2006.
Wow.
We were doing this in the 1980s, where, all of a sudden you're realizing, oh my goodness, the plants are aware. They know, and that they're able to modulate this sound. So the device is very, very simple in that. What it tries to do, and probably the difference, because there's some other devices that exist out there now, is that because we're a community where part of our mission is this reunification with the plant world, this deep connection, the device itself, especially the original ones, were co-created with plants. In other words, the person sat with a plant and was just like, playing around with this algorithm, trying to get it to work, and like kind of looking at the plant going, help guide me through this.
Right.
So we really try hard not to impose a human melody. I mean, there's some limitations, of course, just like a guitar has frets that have, certain octaves and certain notes. It has to have certain parameters to a certain, just like you would expect any musical instrument to. But we try very hard to give maximum liberty, and that's the reason why especially the bamboo device has a lot of different settings that allow you to then give different spaces to the plant based on what you think the plant's like. Is this plant going to want to play in a chromatic scale, or is this plant instead going to want a major scale, or is this plant going to want a Lydian scale, like, so that we can then try to give that plant that space to be able to create their own. And, so that gives us a little bit of leeway of like the difference between when I'm a musician playing with other musicians, I might, of course, modulate my sound or, use certain key signatures because we want to play together, versus if I'm fiddling at home, I can start doing all kinds of weird things and playing intervals in between and all these other aspects, because that's my expression. And so we see the same behavior in plants.
Right. So let's hear it, please. And we're right at the end of the interview. I'm Anthony Wright, and I've been your co-host today with
Adam Dietz. Thanks for joining the
and
conversation.
we have been talking with our guest, Tigrilla Gardenia. And how can people contact you, Tigrilla?
So people can contact me pretty easy by going to @Tigrilla Gardenia, all one word, Tigrilla Gardenia, either .com or at Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, and you can easily find me there.
And what's the name of this song that you're going to play us?
So the song is called Sonic Bliss. Sonic Bliss was a track that was created during the pandemic time, where basically my business partner at the time, Spider Plant, wanted to create a track for healing. So it is a track that has four plant musicians, Spider Plant, Coco the Coconut, the Yucca, and the Kalankoa, who are playing different instruments, and three human, Clive Wright, Simone Vitale, and Annika Cleo. And so together, each one of us recorded off of a bass track that Spider Plant played, and then it was mixed together by a beautiful Krishna Prani, who was an amazing, sound engineer who mixed it all for us.
Great. Well, let's hear it.